Zekthara adjusted his observation equipment and focused his four compound eyes on the viewing screen. The Galactic Council chamber stretched before him like a vast amphitheater carved from living crystal. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat in their designated areas, their various forms creating a rainbow of alien life. Some floated in containment fields, others stood on mechanical legs, and a few existed as pure energy, contained in specialized vessels. The Velthari observer had been watching galactic politics for over 3 centuries. His people were scholars and record keepers, documenting the rise and fall of civilizations with cold scientific precision. They never interfered, never took sides, and never showed emotion. Today felt different, though, and Zekthara could not understand why his normally steady pulse had begun to quicken. The newest members of the council sat in a modest section near the outer ring. Humans. They had joined only 2 years ago after achieving faster-than-light travel and making contact with a merchant vessel from the Kethmori Empire. Their territory consisted of 12 small systems on the galactic rim, barely worth noting on most star charts. Ambassador Kate Morrison represented the humans today. She was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and tired eyes that seemed to see everything. Next to her sat Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan, a military officer whose uniform bore the simple insignia of their space navy. Dr. Lisa Parker, their chief scientist, reviewed data on a primitive tablet device. Zekthara had studied human physiology extensively. They were unremarkable in almost every way. Average height by galactic standards, no natural weapons, limited physical strength, and a lifespan that barely reached 100 of their years. Their technology lagged behind most council members by centuries. Their ships were crude metal, constructs held together with welds and bolts, rather than the elegant energy matrices used by advanced species. The session began as the council speaker, a towering crystalline being from the Zephyrian hegemony, called for attention. The chamber fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems maintaining dozens of different atmospheric requirements. "We gather today to address a matter of cosmic balance," the speaker announced, its voice resonating through translation devices in hundreds of languages. "The Astral Dominion has selected the human colony world designated New Terra for divine cleansing." Zekthara recorded the immediate reactions around the chamber. Most representatives showed no response at all. The Kethmori warriors, fierce, reptilian beings who lived for battle, actually seemed bored. The Peaceful Harmony Collective representatives continued their quiet meditation. Even the insectoid hive minds of the Nexus swarm barely registered interest. This was routine business. The Astral Dominion performed these cleansings every few decades, selecting worlds they deemed spiritually contaminated or cosmically unbalanced. No one questioned their right to do so. The energy beings had existed since before most current civilizations had learned to make fire. They called themselves gods, and after millions of years everyone else had simply accepted the claim. But the humans reacted differently. Ambassador Morrison stood slowly, her chair making a small scraping sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the vast chamber. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan tensed beside her, his hand moving unconsciously toward where a weapon might hang. Dr. Parker looked up from her tablet with wide eyes. "How many people live on New Terra?" Morrison asked, her voice steady but carrying an undertone Zekthara had never heard before. The speaker consulted floating data displays. "Approximately 400,000 human colonists. The cleansing will commence in 30 standard days to allow for proper spiritual preparation." "Spiritual preparation," Morrison repeated slowly. "You mean time to make peace with dying?" "Death is merely a transition to a higher plane of existence," came a new voice that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. The air shimmered, and a being of pure light materialized in the center of the chamber. This was divine. Herald Luminous Prime, speaking for the Astral Dominion, the energy being pulsed with colors that had no names, its form shifting between geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, lesser species across the chamber bowed their heads in automatic reverence. The humans of New Terra have disrupted cosmic harmony through their crude industrial practices and chaotic emotional emanations. The cleansing will restore, balance, and allow their essence to join the eternal flow. Zekathara watched Morrison carefully. In his centuries of observation, he had seen this conversation play out dozens of times with different species. The selected civilization would plead, bargain, or simply accept their fate. Some offered tribute, others begged for mercy. A few tried to negotiate for partial survival. Morrison did none of these things. "No," she said. The word hung in the air like a physical object. Conversations stopped throughout the chamber. Beings who had been ignoring the proceedings suddenly focused their attention on the small human woman. Even Divine Herald Luminous Prime seemed momentarily confused, its shifting patterns slowing. "No?" the energy being finally asked, its voice carrying surprise that bordered on amusement. "No," Morrison repeated, and this time Zekathara clearly identified the emotion in her voice. Not fear, not desperation, but something his translator could only render as determined anger. "You will not cleanse New Terra. You will not kill our people. Find your cosmic balance somewhere else." The chamber erupted in shocked whispers and communication bursts. The Kethmori warriors leaned forward with sudden interest. The Zephyrian artificial intelligences began rapid data exchanges, trying to calculate the probability of what they had just witnessed. Even the usually serene Harmony Collective broke their meditation to focus on the humans. Divine Herald. Luminous Prime pulsed brighter, its form expanding until it filled a significant portion of the central space. "Small flesh creature, you do not understand the forces you dare to address. We are eternal. We are divine. We have shaped the cosmos since before your species discovered fire. What you call refusal, we call ignorance." Lieutenant Commander Sullivan stood beside his ambassador. Dr. Parker closed her tablet and rose as well. Three humans facing a being of godlike power, surrounded by representatives of civilizations that could crush their entire species without effort, and they were not backing down. Morrison stepped forward slightly, and Zekathara noted that her hands were completely steady. "I understand perfectly. You want to commit genocide, and you expect us to cooperate. We will not. Our people have a right to live, and no one, God or otherwise, has the authority to take that away." The silence that followed was absolute. In all his centuries of observation, Zekathara had never recorded such a moment. Species did not refuse the astral dominion. It simply did not happen. Divine Herald. Luminous Prime began to pulse rapidly, its colors shifting toward aggressive reds and violent purples. "Your insolence will be corrected. The cleansing of New Terra will proceed as planned. Afterward, we will consider whether your entire species requires spiritual adjustment." Morrison smiled, and Zekathara felt his pulse quicken again as he recognized something dangerous in that expression. It was not the smile of someone who had accepted defeat. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed exactly the challenge they wanted. "You are welcome to try," she said quietly. As the council session dissolved into chaos and hurried consultations, Zekathara began composing his initial report to the Velthari Collective. For the first time in his long career, he found himself uncertain about how the story would end. The humans were impossibly outmatched, facing forces that had toppled empires and reshaped star systems. But something in Ambassador Morrison's steady gaze and unwavering voice suggested that the astral dominion might have finally chosen the wrong target for their divine cleansing. Zekathara decided to extend his observation mission indefinitely. Whatever happened next, he suspected it would be worth documenting for future generations to study. The age of unquestioned divine authority was about to face its first real test, and the testers were a species that most of the galaxy considered unremarkable. Zekathara had the distinct feeling that unremarkable was about to become very dangerous indeed. Zekathara watched the human delegation return to their modest quarters aboard the orbital station. The Galactic Council session had ended in chaos 3 hours ago, with representatives from dozens of worlds scrambling to contact their home governments. Word of the human refusal was spreading across the galaxy faster than light-speed communications could carry it. The Velthari observer had positioned monitoring equipment to track human activities. His scientific curiosity demanded he understand how this species would handle the impossible situation they had created for themselves. Every military analysis showed the same result. The humans possessed approximately 200 combat vessels. Most of them converted cargo ships with basic weapons. The Astral Dominion commanded forces that existed as pure energy, capable of reshaping matter with thought alone. Ambassador Morrison was speaking rapidly into a communication device when Zekthara tuned into their conversation. The primitive encryption was easily bypassed by Velthari technology. "I need you to contact Admiral Mitchell immediately," Morrison was saying. "Tell him the situation has changed. We are not evacuating New Terra. We are defending it." Lieutenant Commander Sullivan was working at a separate terminal, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the control surface. "Ambassador, I have Captain Blake on the emergency channel. He wants to know if the reports are accurate." "Put him through," Morrison replied without hesitation. The holographic image of a weathered man in a naval uniform appeared above the communication table. Captain Ryan Blake looked tired, but his eyes were sharp and focused. Behind him, Zekthara could see the bridge of what appeared to be a human warship. "Kate, please tell me you did not just declare war on beings that most of the galaxy considers gods," Blake said with a weary smile. "I told them they cannot murder our people, Ryan. If they consider that a declaration of war, then we have bigger problems than I thought." Blake nodded slowly. "Fair enough. What do you need from us?" "Everything you can give me. How many ships can you gather?" "The entire Third Fleet is currently deployed near the outer colonies. That gives us 47 combat vessels of various classes. The Home Defense Force has another 60 ships, but half of those are patrol boats that would not last 5 minutes in a real fight." Dr. Parker looked up from her data tablet. "Captain Blake, what about the civilian ships? Cargo haulers, mining vessels, anything with an engine and life support?" Blake raised an eyebrow. "Lisa, those are not warships. They have no weapons, no armor, and no military training." "They have engines and they can carry people," Parker replied firmly. "We need to evacuate New Terra's population, but we also need every vessel we can get to buy them time." Morrison was studying star charts on her personal display. "How long do we have before the Astral Dominion reaches New Terra?" "Their energy ships move faster than anything we possess," Sullivan reported. "Intelligence estimates suggest they will arrive in 22 standard days. Then we have 22 days to accomplish the impossible," Morrison said quietly. Zekthara recorded this exchange with growing fascination. The humans were not behaving according to any established pattern. Faced with certain destruction, most species would either surrender immediately or attempt to negotiate some form of partial survival. These humans were talking about fighting back. Over the next several hours, Zekthara observed a remarkable transformation in human space. Captain Blake's emergency communications triggered a response that spread through their territory like a shockwave. Military commanders, civilian leaders, and private citizens began mobilizing with an efficiency that surprised even the Velthari observer. Admiral Scott Mitchell arrived at the council station within 18 hours, bringing with him a task force of 15 heavy cruisers. The grizzled military leader met immediately with Ambassador Morrison and her team. "Kate, I have been fighting space pirates and border disputes for 30 years, Mitchell said as he reviewed tactical displays. "I have never faced anything like this. Our weapons are kinetic projectiles and energy beams. These astral dominion beings exist as living energy. How do we hurt something that has no physical form?" Dr. Parker had been working non-stop since the council session ended. Her research materials covered every available surface in the human quarters. "I have been studying every piece of data we have on the Astral Dominion. There might be a way." She activated a holographic display showing complex energy patterns. "The Dominion beings maintain their consciousness through quantum field manipulation. They are not truly immortal gods. They are very old energy creatures who have learned to exist without physical bodies." "Can we disrupt those quantum fields?" Morrison asked. "Possibly, but it would require modifications to every weapon we possess, and we would need to get close enough to affect their energy matrices. Very close." Captain Blake studied the technical specifications Parker had compiled. "How close are we talking about?" "Ramming distance," Parker said quietly. The room fell silent. Zekthara noted elevated stress indicators in all the human life, signs he was monitoring. They understood what she was suggesting. Admiral Mitchell was the first to speak. You want our ships to ram energy beings that can reshape matter with their thoughts. I want our ships to get close enough to disrupt their quantum coherence before they can react, Parker corrected. The modifications I am proposing will create a field collapse effect. If we can get within 200 meters of a Dominion entity, we can force it back into physical form. Once it has mass and substance, our conventional weapons can damage it. Morrison was studying personnel reports on her tablet. How many people live on New Terra now? 412,000, including children, Sullivan replied. And how many people do we have available to defend them? Mitchell consulted his military databases. If we mobilize every combat ship in human space, we can field approximately 180 vessels with full crews. That represents about 40,000 military personnel. What about civilian volunteers? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Military officers throughout human space had been trained to keep civilians away from combat zones. Now their ambassador was asking them to consider the opposite. Blake cleared his throat. Kate, we have been getting communications from civilian ship captains asking how they can help. Cargo haulers, mining ships, passenger transports, even private yachts. People want to do something. How many civilian vessels could we potentially coordinate? Over 300 ships of various types and sizes, Mitchell said after checking updated reports. But Kate, these are not warships. They have no weapons, minimal armor, and crews with no military training. Morrison stood and walked to the main viewing port, looking out at the stars beyond the council station. Ryan Scott, how many people do you think the Astral Dominion has killed over the millennia? Unknown, Mitchell replied. They have been performing these cleansings for thousands of years. The total could be in the billions. And how many species have fought back? The two military officers exchanged glances. None that we know of, Blake admitted. Morrison turned back to face the group. Then maybe it is time someone tried. Zekthara watched as the humans began implementing what could only be described as controlled madness. Dr. Parker worked with engineering teams to design quantum disruption devices that could be fitted to any vessel with a power source. Captain Blake coordinated the movement of military ships toward New Terra. Admiral Mitchell established communication networks that reached every human settlement in their territory. But the most remarkable development was happening at the civilian level. Merchant Captain Maria Santos volunteered her cargo fleet to help evacuate New Terra's population. Mining Supervisor Joe Murphy offered his industrial ships to carry military supplies. Even retired teacher Susan Wright organized civilian support networks to coordinate families and resources. Within 72 hours of Morrison's refusal at the council, human space had transformed into something resembling a military campaign, run by people who had no business attempting such a thing. They were improvising weapons, converting cargo ships into troop transports, and preparing to fight beings that most of the galaxy worshipped as gods. Zekthara transmitted his observations to the Velthari Collective with a notation he had never used before in 3 centuries of reporting. The humans were either about to accomplish something unprecedented in galactic history, or they were about to provide a spectacular example of why some challenges should never be accepted. Either way, the next 20 days would determine whether courage and determination could overcome impossible odds, or whether the age of divine authority would continue unchallenged for another 1,000,000 years. Zekthara positioned his observation vessel at maximum safe distance from the New Terra system. The human fleet had arrived 3 days before the Astral Dominion, giving them time to establish defensive positions around the colony world. What the Velthari observer saw defied every military principle he had studied in his 3 centuries of galactic warfare documentation. The human formation looked like chaos. Military vessels mixed with cargo ships, mining platforms retrofitted with weapons, and civilian transports that had no business being in a combat zone. Captain Blake's flagship, the Defiant Star, held the center position alongside Admiral Mitchell's heavy cruiser Endurance. Around them, over 400 vessels of every size and description waited in formations that seemed to follow no standard tactical doctrine. Dr. Parker had worked miracles in the past 20 days. Every human ship now carried quantum disruption devices built from spare parts, industrial equipment, and pure determination. The modifications were crude but functional, designed to collapse the energy matrices that allowed astral dominion beings to exist without physical form. On the surface of New Terra, Marine Colonel Beth Adams coordinated evacuation efforts while simultaneously preparing defensive positions. The planet held over 400,000 civilians, including families with children who had built lives in the farming communities and industrial centers scattered across 3 continents. Zekthara monitored human communications as the final preparations took place. The conversations revealed something his analytical mind struggled to categorize. These people were terrified, but they were not running away. They understood they were probably going to die, but they were making jokes and checking on each other's families. It was a contradiction that challenged everything the Velthari knew about rational behavior. The astral dominion arrived exactly when predicted, their presence announced by distortions in space-time that made reality itself seem to bend. 12. Beings of pure energy emerged from dimensional rifts, each one larger than the biggest human warship. They pulsed with colors that had no names, geometric patterns shifting through forms that hurt to perceive directly. At their center floated the eternal radiance, the entity that had spoken through Divine Herald Luminous Prime at the council session. Its form was more complex than the others, layers of energy folded through dimensions that normal matter could not access. When it spoke, the words seemed to bypass communication systems and speak directly to the minds of every living creature in the system. Small flesh creatures, you have had time to consider your error. Withdraw your vessels and allow the cleansing to proceed. Your defiance has been noted, but can still be forgiven. Captain Blake's response came through standard communication channels, his voice steady despite the impossible odds he faced. This is Captain Ryan Blake of the Human Defense Fleet. You are not welcome in this system. Turn around and leave, or we will force you to leave. The eternal radiance pulsed brighter, its energy patterns shifting toward aggressive configurations. You cannot force beings of pure consciousness, flesh creature. We are eternal. We are divine. Your primitive weapons cannot harm us. Let us find out, Blake replied. Zekthara recorded the moment when 400 human vessels opened fire simultaneously. Energy beams, kinetic projectiles, and improvised weapons converged on the Astral Dominion formation. The attacks passed, harmlessly through the energy beings, having no effect on creatures that existed beyond physical matter. But the humans had expected this. As their conventional weapons proved useless, the real attack began. 50 volunteer ships, mostly converted cargo vessels and mining platforms, activated their quantum disruption devices and accelerated directly toward the Dominion entities. The Gi energy beings reacted with surprise as the first disruption fields activated. Zekthara watched the eternal radiance flicker, its perfect energy matrix becoming unstable as quantum interference forced portions of its consciousness into physical form. For a brief moment, parts of the godlike entity became solid matter vulnerable to conventional weapons. The mining ship Determined Prospector, commanded by volunteer Captain Joe Murphy, rammed directly into the partially materialized section of a Dominion entity. The explosion was visible across the entire system as both vessels were destroyed instantly, but when the energy cleared, the astral being was wounded, its perfect form disrupted and leaking power. The sight of a bleeding god changed everything. Admiral Mitchell's voice cut across all channels. All units. Priority targets are disrupted. Entities. Focus fire on any Dominion being showing physical manifestation. The battle transformed from hopeless defiance into actual warfare. Human ships swarmed around the energy beings, quantum disruption devices forcing brief moments of vulnerability that conventional weapons could exploit. The cost was terrible. Every disruption required a ship to get within ramming distance of creatures that could reshape matter with thought. The cargo transport New Hope, carrying 300 civilian volunteers, managed to disrupt a Dominion entity long enough for Admiral Mitchell's cruiser to land killing blows with its main batteries. The transport was vaporized by the dying energy being's final burst, but its sacrifice had proven that gods could die. Zekthara observed Captain Blake coordinating the chaotic battle from his flagship's bridge. The Defiant star had taken heavy damage, its hull scarred by energy discharges that existed in dimensions human science barely understood. But Blake continued issuing orders, directing his impossible fleet in a dance of sacrifice and violence around beings of godlike power. The Eternal Radiance decided to end the battle personally. The entity focused its full attention on the human flagship, reality bending around it as cosmic forces prepared to erase the Defiant star from existence. But before the attack could be completed, a small communications vessel broke formation and flew directly into the entity's energy matrix. The ship was the messenger, crewed by a single officer. Communications specialist Lucy Blake, Captain Blake's 22-year-old daughter, had volunteered for the most dangerous job in the fleet. Her quantum disruption device was the most powerful the humans had built, designed to cause maximum interference at the cost of the operator's life. The explosion forced the Eternal Radiance into full physical manifestation for nearly 30 seconds. Every human weapon in range opened fire on the materialized god, tearing chunks from its crystallized energy form. The entity screamed in frequencies that made space itself vibrate, experiencing pain for the first time in millions of years of existence. But Lucy Blake was gone, vaporized along with her ship in the moment of victory. Zekthara recorded Captain Blake's reaction through his monitoring equipment. The human commander stood frozen on his bridge, staring at the empty space where his daughter had died. For a moment that stretched into eternity, the battle seemed to pause as both sides processed what had just happened. Then something changed in the human fleet. Zekthara's sensors detected massive spikes in adrenaline, elevated heart rates, and brain chemistry patterns that his computers could not properly classify. The closest translation his equipment could provide was a combination of grief, rage, and absolute determination that exceeded normal biological parameters. Captain Blake's voice when it came was quiet, but carried across every human channel with perfect clarity. All ships, all volunteers, all defenders of New Terra. They just killed my daughter while she was trying to save lives. I want you to remember that. I want you to remember that when you decide how far you are willing to go to stop these things, the Izorder human fleet's attack pattern changed from coordinated tactics to something that resembled a swarm of angry insects. Ships broke formation and began individual assault runs. Crews volunteering for suicide missions with a frequency that shocked even the veteran observer. Mining vessels loaded with explosives rammed into energy beings. Cargo ships used their own hulls as weapons. Even damaged vessels limping away from the battle turned around for final attacks. The Astral Dominion found themselves facing something they had never encountered in millions of years of cosmic dominance. These humans did not fight like a military force following tactical doctrine. They fought like a family that had been attacked, and every member was willing to die to protect the others. Zekthara began composing an emergency report to the Velthari collective. The impossible was happening above New Terra, and he was not certain his superiors would believe the data he was recording. Gods were learning what it meant to bleed, and the humans were teaching them with weapons built from spare parts and determination that defied rational analysis. Zekthara watched in amazement as human reinforcements continued arriving in the New Terra system. Word of the battle had spread through their territory faster than official communications, carried by something the humans called the network. Not government channels or military orders, but families calling families, friends contacting friends, and old soldiers reaching out to anyone who would listen. Admiral Scott Mitchell coordinated the growing fleet from his command ship Endurance. In the 3 days since Lucy Blake's sacrifice, over 200 additional vessels had joined the defense. They came from every corner of human space. Merchant ships, mining platforms, passenger transports, and even private yachts modified with whatever weapons their owners could find. The Astral Dominion had retreated to the outer edge of the system, after losing 2 of their number in the initial battle. The wounded energy beings flickered with unstable patterns, their perfect forms damaged by weapons they had thought impossible. The Eternal Radiance itself bore scars from the human attack, crystallized sections where its energy matrix had been forced into physical form and then damaged. Dr. Lisa Parker worked frantically in her mobile laboratory aboard the research vessel, Discovery. The quantum disruption technology had proven effective, but she needed to improve it. The current devices required ships to get within ramming distance, and too many brave volunteers had already died, proving that gods could bleed. Captain Ryan Blake stood on the bridge of his scarred flagship, studying tactical displays that showed the impossible. His daughter was gone, vaporized while saving the fleet, but her sacrifice had changed everything. The humans now knew their enemy could be hurt, and that knowledge was spreading through their forces like fire. General Amy Foster arrived with the Marine Expeditionary Force, bringing 15,000 ground troops and their equipment. Her transports took up defensive positions around New Terra, while landing parties reinforced Colonel Beth Adams' planetary defenses. The civilians were still being evacuated, but the process was slow and dangerous with the Astral Dominion controlling the outer system. "Captain Blake," came a voice over the communications system. "This is Engineer Nick Carter aboard the mobile construction platform Heavy Lifter. We have completed modifications to 50 more civilian vessels. They are ready for combat operations." Blake nodded grimly. Carter had been working around the clock installing Dr. Parker's quantum disruption devices on any ship with a power source and willing crew. The engineer had turned cargo haulers into warships and mining platforms into weapons of war using nothing but spare parts and determination. The tactical situation was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. A primitive species was holding its own against beings that most civilizations worshipped as gods. But the cost was terrible. Over 100 human vessels had been destroyed, and thousands of people had died. Every victory came at a price that would have broken most military forces, but the humans were not breaking. If anything, they seemed to be getting more dangerous. "All ships, this is Admiral Mitchell," came the fleet commander's voice across all channels. "We have confirmed reports that Astral Dominion forces are moving toward the colonies at New Boston, Liberty Point, and Harmony Station. They are attempting to force us to divide our fleet by threatening multiple targets simultaneously." Captain Blake studied the strategic display. The 3 colonies represented over 2 million human lives, scattered across systems that would take days to reach even at maximum speed. Defending all of them with their current forces would be impossible. "Sir," reported his tactical officer, "we are receiving volunteer requests from civilian ships at all 3 colony systems. Local defense forces are organizing, but they have minimal military equipment." Blake felt something cold settle in his chest. The Astral Dominion had learned from their first encounter, instead of concentrating their forces for a decisive battle, they were spreading the conflict across human space, forcing impossible choices between which lives to save. "Admiral," Blake said over the command channel, "I am taking half the fleet to New Boston. The colonists there include my sister's family." Mitchell's response was immediate. "Ryan, we cannot split our forces. If we divide the fleet, we lose our tactical advantage." "Then we lose it," Blake replied. "Because I am not abandoning those people, and neither are you. We will make the impossible choice by refusing to choose. We defend everyone." Dr. Parker's voice cut through the debate. "I have an idea, but it is extremely dangerous. The quantum disruption technology can be scaled up significantly. Instead of individual ship devices, we could create system-wide interference patterns." "Explain," Mitchell demanded. "If we position modified ships at specific points throughout a star system, we can create overlapping disruption fields that force Astral Dominion entities into physical form across vast distances. But the power requirements would drain every ship's reactor, leaving them defenseless." Blake understood immediately. "You want to turn our entire fleet into a trap." "I want to turn our entire species into a trap," Parker corrected. "Every human system, every colony, every ship. We create a galaxy-wide network of quantum disruption fields. The Astral Dominion would find themselves vulnerable everywhere they go in human space." The concept was madness. It would require coordinating thousands of ships across dozens of systems with no margin for error, and no retreat possible if the plan failed. But it was also the only way to protect everyone. "How long do you need?" Mitchell asked. 48 hours to distribute the modified equipment, another 12 hours to coordinate positioning across all systems. We do not have 60 hours, Blake pointed out. The Dominion forces will reach the outer colonies in 36 hours. Engineer Carter's voice came over the channel. Then we buy time the hard way. Some of us go out there and delay them. What followed was a conversation that Zekathara found difficult to categorize. Military commanders, civilian volunteers, scientists, and ordinary citizens discussed sacrificing themselves with the same tone they might use to plan a dinner party. They were not being heroic or dramatic. They were simply solving a problem that required some of them to die. Captain Maria Santos volunteered her cargo fleet to intercept the Dominion forces heading for New Boston. Mining supervisor Joe Murphy offered his industrial ships to delay the attack on Liberty Point. Even retired teacher Susan Wright coordinated civilian vessels to protect Harmony Station, crewing her transport with volunteer parents and grandparents who insisted they had lived full lives. Blake felt his chest tighten as he listened to ordinary people casually accepting death to buy time for Dr. Parker's desperate plan. These were not soldiers trained for war. They were shopkeepers, farmers, engineers, and teachers who had decided that some things were worth dying for. All volunteer units, Blake announced. Your job is not to win. Your job is to survive as long as possible, while Dr. Parker prepares the trap. Run when you need to. Hide when you can. Fight only when you must. We need every hour you can give us. The next 36 hours became a masterpiece of coordinated chaos. Human volunteers scattered across their territory, using every dirty trick they could imagine to slow down godlike entities. They used asteroid fields for cover, employed hit-and-run tactics, and turned their own colonies into elaborate ambush sites. Santos led the Dominion forces through a running battle across 3 star systems, her cargo ships playing a deadly game of tag with beings of pure energy. Murphy's miners used their knowledge of asteroid belts to create improvised weapons, dropping entire mountains on surprised energy beings. Wright's civilian fleet actually managed to wound a Dominion entity by coordinating simultaneous ramming attacks from 6 directions. The volunteers paid a terrible price. Santos died when her flagship was caught in open space. Murphy's entire mining platform was vaporized while protecting a civilian transport. Wright's elderly crew sacrificed themselves one by one, buying minutes that became hours, but they succeeded. When Dr. Parker announced the trap was ready, human forces across 12 star systems activated quantum disruption fields simultaneously. The astral dominion suddenly found themselves vulnerable everywhere. Their perfect energy forms forced into physical matter that could be damaged by primitive human weapons. Zekathara transmitted an emergency update to the Velthari collective. The impossible had become inevitable. A species that most of the galaxy considered unremarkable had just declared war on beings worshipped as gods, and they were winning through sheer determination and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. The age of divine authority was ending, and it was ending because ordinary people had decided that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Zekathara watched the final confrontation unfold across human space with sensors that could barely track what was happening. The quantum disruption trap had worked beyond Dr. Parker's wildest hopes. Astral Dominion entities throughout 12 star systems found themselves suddenly vulnerable, their energy forms forced into physical matter that human weapons could damage. But the eternal radiance was not finished. The ancient being had existed for millions of years, watching civilizations rise and fall like waves on a cosmic shore. It would not be defeated by creatures that had barely learned to leave their home planet. The entity abandoned its forces and descended directly toward New Terra, its massive form burning through space like a falling star. If it could not cleanse the human colony through divine authority, it would do so through raw power that would crack the planet like an egg. Captain Ryan Blake stood on the bridge of his battered flagship, watching his enemy approach. The Defiant Star had taken damage that should have destroyed it twice over, but Engineer Carter's repair crews had kept it fighting with spare parts and determination. Around him, the remnants of the human fleet prepared for what everyone knew would be the final battle. All ships, all defenders, Blake announced across every communication channel in human space. The Eternal Radiance is making its final move. It intends to destroy New Terra personally. We will stop it here or we will die trying. Admiral Mitchell's voice came from the heavy cruiser Endurance, its hull scarred from dozens of battles. Ryan, our conventional weapons cannot penetrate its energy shields. Even with quantum disruption, something that size will require close-range attacks. Dr. Parker's laboratory ship Discovery moved into position alongside the military vessels. Captain Blake, I have one final modification to the disruption technology, but it requires a direct connection to the entity's energy matrix. Someone will have to ram it at full speed. Blake nodded slowly. He had known this moment would come since his daughter Lucy died, proving that gods could bleed. The math was simple. Someone had to sacrifice themselves to save everyone else, and as fleet commander, that responsibility was his. All ships prepare for final assault. I will take the Defiant Star in first. Use the disruption window to hit it with everything you have. But before Blake could give the order to attack, communication signals flooded in from across human space. Marine Colonel Beth Adams reported from New Terra's surface that civilian volunteers were taking positions around the planet's defensive installations. Engineer Carter announced that mining ships throughout the system were loading themselves with explosives. Even retired teacher Susan Wright's voice came through from a converted passenger liner that had no business being in a combat zone. Captain Blake, Wright said calmly, my ship is loaded with 300 volunteers, most of them grandparents and retired folks. We have nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Let us go first. Blake felt his throat tighten. Susan, you are civilians. This is not your fight. With respect, Captain, this became our fight the moment those things decided our grandchildren did not deserve to live. We are going in. Before Blake could object, Wright's passenger liner accelerated toward the Eternal Radiance at maximum speed. The converted transport had been fitted with the largest quantum disruption device Dr. Parker could build, powered by the ship's entire reactor output. As it approached the energy being, space itself seemed to bend and twist around the massive entity. The Eternal Radiance tried to destroy the approaching ship with focused energy beams, but the disruption field interfered with its ability to manipulate matter. For the first time in millions of years, the godlike being found its power unreliable. Wright's liner struck the Eternal Radiance directly in its energy core. The explosion was visible from the outer edge of the star system, a burst of light that briefly outshone New Terra's sun. When the glare faded, the ancient entity was wounded and partially materialized, its perfect energy form flickering with unstable patterns. But Susan Wright and her 300 volunteers were gone. The sight of their sacrifice triggered something in the human fleet that Zekthara's instruments could not properly measure. Every ship, from Admiral Mitchell's heavy cruiser to the smallest mining platform, attacked simultaneously. They fired weapons, launched missiles, and rammed into the wounded god with a fury that made space itself seem to burn. Engineer Carter's industrial ship Heavy Lifter, loaded with mining explosives, detonated against the Eternal Radiance's flank. Captain Santos's cargo vessels, crewed by her surviving crew members, struck from multiple angles. Even damaged ships that could barely move used their final moments to inflict more wounds on the ancient entity. The Eternal Radiance screamed in, frequencies that shattered metal and cracked asteroid surfaces. It tried to retreat, to escape back to the energy dimensions where it could heal. But Dr. Parker's quantum disruption fields held it in physical form. For the first time since the universe was young, a being that called itself God experienced true fear. Colonel Adams coordinated the attack from New Terra's surface, using the planet's defensive weapons to strike at the entity from below. Marine units that had been prepared to fight an invasion instead found themselves shooting at a god with small arms and determination. The weapons did minimal damage, but every hit reminded the Eternal Radiance that even the smallest humans refused to accept its authority. Captain Blake brought the Defiant Star in for the final attack. His flagship was dying, its hull breached in dozens of places and its engines failing. But it still had weapons, and Blake still had the memory of his daughter's sacrifice driving him forward. Lucy, he whispered, as he aimed his ship at the wounded god. This is for you. The defiant star struck the eternal radiance at ramming speed, its quantum disruption device overloading in a cascade failure that tore holes in reality itself. Blake died in the impact, but his sacrifice completed what his daughter had started. The ancient entity's energy matrix collapsed completely, forcing it into full physical form. Admiral Mitchell and the surviving fleet concentrated their fire on the materialized god. Energy beams, kinetic projectiles, and improvised weapons struck the eternal radiance from every direction. The being that had existed since before most stars were born found itself dying, killed by creatures it had considered insignificant. As the eternal radiance collapsed into flickering energy and fading light, its final words echoed across the battlefield. "Impossible, we are eternal, we are divine. How can flesh defeat eternity?" Dr. Parker's voice answered from her laboratory ship. "You are not eternal. You are just old, and you made the mistake of threatening our families. The death of the eternal." Radiance sent shockwaves through the remaining astral dominion forces across human space. Energy beings that had considered themselves gods suddenly found themselves facing creatures that refused to worship anything except their own determination to protect each other. Over the following days, the surviving Dominion entities retreated from human territory. Some attempted to continue their cleansing operations, but found themselves facing coordinated resistance from an entire species that had learned how to hurt gods. Others simply fled, abandoning their divine pretensions rather than face more human fury. Sekthara compiled his final report to the Velthari Collective as he watched the humans begin rebuilding their shattered fleets. They had lost over half their military vessels and thousands of civilian volunteers. Captain Blake was dead, along with his daughter and countless others who had sacrificed themselves to prove that gods could fall. But they had won. A species that most of the galaxy considered unremarkable had defeated beings worshipped as divine through nothing more complicated than refusing to accept that anyone had the right to decide who lived and who died. 6 months later, Ambassador Kate Morrison returned to the Galactic Council. She took her seat in the same modest section reserved for minor species, but now when she spoke, representatives from across the galaxy listened with respectful attention. The age of unquestioned divine authority was over. The astral dominion still existed, but they no longer performed cleansings. Other species began to question why they had ever accepted that gods had the right to murder entire populations in the name of cosmic balance. Sekthara ended his observation with a note that puzzled his superiors for generations afterward. The humans fight like parents protecting their children, and they consider every member of their species family. Recommend extreme caution if Velthari interests ever conflict with human civilians. They do not fight to conquer. They fight to protect. And when something they love is threatened, they become a force that even gods learn to fear. The galaxy was a different place now, quieter but safer, because everyone understood that humanity was watching, and humanity had made it very clear that some lines should never be crossed.